Welcome to Stories from the Center of the Universe, the podcast about the human experience.
Carroll LaHaye, welcome to the Center of the Universe.
Well, thanks very much for having me, Paul. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be fun, I think.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. This is, as I mentioned to you earlier, this is my first podcast, so it's quite a treat.
But you've been on the radio, you've been on TV.
I have numerous times, not to my liking necessarily, but definitely have been.
You are generally considered an introvert?
I would say so.
Yeah.
Except for maybe on the court. Somebody would not classify me as an introvert on the court or as a coach.
Both as a player and a coach?
Yeah, I would say within the boundaries of the court.
Okay, I like that. And something about sports that brings that out in people, especially basketball. Go ahead.
I think so because, I'm one of six, and so we were competitive.
What number were you?
I was the second.
Okay.
But the oldest girl. So I had an older brother. And then, but when we got together, no matter whether it was kickball or wiffle ball or basketball upstairs in our barn, didn't matter. You know, it was
1 through 6 were going at it.
Absolutely. And then we'd invite our friends, and so that was even more. I think that's what happened to my sisters and myself. I mean, we got a chance to compete with my brother's friends, my 3 brothers' friends, and I think it just made us more competitive, tougher athletes, and it was a good experience for all of us.
And your parents having 6 kids, 3 and 3 like that, did it go boy, girl, all the way through?
It actually went boy, girl, girl, boy.
Okay. Had to mix it up there at the end a little bit.
3 boys, 3 girls, 3 redheads, 3 brown heads.
Wow. It's a lot of fun when LaHaye's came around, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Well, my dad was one of 12, so,
wow.
I think he probably would have had more kids if my mother would have.
Yeah, I have that in my family. I wanted more kids than my wife did. I don't know what that's about. I guess since the woman's going 9 months.
I think so.
Yeah.
Or they have to do a lot of the work. Maybe.
Yeah, well, post-birth, they're doing more of the work maybe than Dad is typically.
Yeah.
All right, so our listeners have probably picked up on a slight accent from you, and you've been here for quite some time here in Central Virginia, but you're ours. People are going to guess New England, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I would guess like Western Massachusetts, but I'm not an expert in dialects and accents. Where are you from?
Well, a lot of people will ask me if I'm from Boston, and of course for a Mainer, a true Mainer, that is a definite insult. But, I grew up in Mid-Coast, Maine. Most of the time I tell people that I'm from Mount Desert Island, which really isn't correct. However, that's where my mother was from, and when all of us kids graduated from high school, my parents moved back to Southwest Harbor, Maine. And so I just said it's easier for people to understand that, I'm from Mount Desert Island, or I was born in Bar Harbor, so
yeah.
I just claim that.
Well, it's one of the most well-known parts of Maine, Bar Harbor, right?
Yeah.
And I'm saying Bar Harbor, and you're saying Bar Harbor.
Bar Harbor.
Yeah, I'm saying it incorrectly because you're from there.
I don't know if it's incorrectly. It's like people will always correct me. And
really?
Say, you mean Bar Harbor?
You're like, nope.
Okay, if that's how you want to understand it, but Bar Harbor. So.
I think you get to decide how it's said since you grew up in that area. All right, so it's funny you mentioned it's an insult if somebody says you sound like you're from Boston. My guess is if you're from New England and you're talking to people outside of New Englanders are very tight. But if it's within New England, there's some competition, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think more people from Maine and maybe Boston have those types of accents. I don't think of my cousins that live in Vermont and New Hampshire, and even somebody from Connecticut, one of the New England states, as having as much of a accent as what I think. I know what kind of accent that is after living here in Virginia for so long.
Right.
When I go home and I hear my relatives speak, I'm thinking, oh, wow, that's quite an accent.
Is it near the water? Is that the
Yes.
thing? It's
Yes.
got to be a water thing.
Yes. Well, let's say it is.
Maybe. But I mean, there are other parts of New England that are on the water that don't have an accent like that.
Right, but that's a good point about the coast, because when you get around any of those fishermen up there, I mean, they have some true accents. And there's a guy that graduated from Randolph Macon whose dad is from Dover Foxcroft, Maine.
Okay.
And he's been down here because he's, I think, in his early 90s. And he's been down here longer than I have, but he has a tremendous Maine accent. He's never lost it.
That's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yes, it really is. But then I keep thinking, like, well, why have I lost my accent? And I think it's because when I was recruiting and I had to talk to a young woman or her family, is they had to understand what I was saying. Because one player told me that, she said, you called and said that you wanted me to be the point guard. And she said, I'm going to be the point guard. And so she got so excited because, I mean, she was from a religious family, and she just thought that, boy, I put a real spin on that recruiting.
I mean, there's no way she can't start, right, if she's the point guard.
Point guard.
Where was she from?
Mechanicsville.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, it was Melody Fierno.
Okay.
From Fierno's Brunswick Stew.
Oh, yeah,
So
yeah.
she's,
Oh, wow. Yeah, very well-known name in this area.
Yeah.
The point guard.
The point guard.
And I imagine you were recruiting maybe other point guards.
I was, and so I think that's why some of my accent has changed, is that I had to kind of sound like I wasn't a derelict or
Well, just
somebody that didn't really know what the words were supposed to be.
I think it's probably true in Maine. You can tell me if it is or isn't. I know in certain parts of Virginia, if you're not born in that part of the world, you're not from there. And you could have moved there when you were 1 year old, but you're not from there because you weren't born there. I imagine that's true in parts of Maine, or maybe all of Maine.
Oh, absolutely. And there's parts of Maine that I even think of Virginia being something like Maine in terms of the geography, or like Northern Virginia and Southwest Virginia. There's down east Maine, and then there's the Portland area,
Right.
Southern Maine. And it's like Southern Maine is like Northern Virginia, and Southwest Virginia is like down east, Washington County and all of that. Very
Right.
poor, not much going on in those places like there is like in Northern Virginia or Southern Maine.
Yeah, and Maine's a really big state. I don't think people realize how big of a state it is.
Yeah, 4/5 of it is forest.
That's wild.
It's wild.
For an East Coast state, especially.
Yeah, pine tree state.
I think I told you when we spoke a couple weeks ago. Has it been a couple weeks, or maybe only a week or so?
Geez, I lose track of time.
So
Paul,
do I. So do I. The idea of a beach in Maine, and I got to experience this in August. It doesn't seem like it's a beachy sort of thing, because you go to Virginia Beach or Nag's Head, it's really warm in August. I've never felt colder water, and it didn't make sense in my brain that it was August and the water was that cold. Do people enjoy going to the beach in Maine?
Well, I think Mainers do for sure, because that's kind of like what they grew up with.
Yeah.
But I think anybody that's vacationing in Maine, which also is called the vacation land, I think it is a definite shock when they put those feet in the toes in the sand, toes in the water. It's quite chilly.
And there were people in the water. I'm like, what are they doing?
Yes. But Maine has a lot of nice ponds and a lot of nice lakes, and I think that some people have discovered those rather than the ocean. But then there are people who just love the ocean, prefer the ocean.
Yeah.
And, it's definitely a rock-bound coast. You really have to seek out those beaches, those sandy beaches.
Yeah.
You'll find them.
The sun hits America every day in some part of Maine. And I think it's a national park. Do I have that right? Or do you know?
Acadia National Park. The sun rises in Bar Harbor.
Yeah,
Acadia National
right
Park.
there.
Mm-hmm.
So the part of the world you're from.
You can go to Cadillac Mountain and see the sunrise every day if you'd like.
And it's probably majestic,
Oh,
magnificent.
There's nothing like it.
Yeah.
It's
Should I go up
beautiful.
there?
You absolutely should. I highly recommend it.
I'm a big national park guy. I've not made it to Acadia. My kids are older now. I can probably coax my wife up there.
Yeah, Acadia National Park is, it's the majority of Mount Desert Island.
Okay.
So,
Oh, gotcha.
so all the little towns on the island, there's a lot of the park area, a lot of carriage trails, a lot of hiking trails, just some beautiful, granite cliffs and hiking trails that people come from all over the world. And of course the Appalachian Trail ends on Mount Katahdin,
Okay.
which is in Millinocket, Maine.
So when you say ends, do people normally start in the south and go north when they walk the entire trail?
Most of the people that I have heard that have walked the entire trail, and that's not many, by the way,
Yeah.
they start in Georgia. I believe it's Georgia, and have hiked all the way to Mount Katahdin or Millinocket.
It's like it's some ridiculous amount of mileage.
Yes.
It's like over 2,000.
Yes.
Yeah.
And quite a few nights on the trail as well.
Yeah, you got to be exhausted by the time they get to the end
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, I'm not much of a hiker in that way, but when I do go home to Maine to visit my family, if I go to the island, I love to go with my sister-in-law and hike those trails, and she has some pretty good routes, but they're challenging.
Yeah.
Cliffs.
A lot of up and down, a lot of relief there.
Yep, but the park and what's the Conservative Corps or
Conservation Corps.
Conservation Corps.
Yeah.
They've done a lot of work on those trails, and they're really nice, really
Yeah,
safe. And
The one, the Blue Ridge Parkway, the Conservation Corps did a lot of the, I don't even know how to describe them, like knee-high walls
yes,
sort of thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
resting places, and just as if you're going to step up onto a piece of cliff or something like that, there's a nice step. You feel a little safe and
Right.
everything, but still some challenges.
So if you left here and drove straight to where your family is in Maine, how long would it take you?
16 hours.
That's a long drive.
That's a long hours. When I was younger, I could do it. I would leave like maybe 3:30 in the morning and arrive anywhere. It depends on traffic and stopping and all of that, but I would get home before dark during the summertime because
Right.
that's most of the time when I went. But now I split it up, and Danbury, Connecticut is 8 hours from Ashland. If you go
another 8 hours past that?
from Danbury, Connecticut.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to, I'm a geography guy, it's hard for me to wrap my head around that.
Yeah. And traveling on the East Coast is nothing like traveling elsewhere in some parts. I have a sister that lives in Alaska. And the first time I visited her, she said, "We're going to go to Valdez." And I said, "Okay. How long a trip is that?" And she said, 8 hours. And I go, 8 hours? Holy moly. But I bet we met 10 cars.
Yeah, wow.
you
Yeah, that's
know,
wild.
No traffic. Few moose.
What is it about people from Maine that, obviously not all of them, but a lot of people from Maine end up in Alaska? I say a lot, but I know others that have done that. And it's just something about the northern climes and,
Yeah, probably the freedoms, like being out in the wild and, probably loners.
yeah, well, maybe.
Nobody would bother them except for the animals, wild animals,
All right,
whatever.
so you're a kid in Maine, 9, 10 years old. You have a lot of siblings. You guys sounded like you were very competitive. Were there other things besides sports that you guys were doing as kids?
We were pretty much wrapped up in sports because if somebody wasn't, and most of us were 3-sport athletes. And I remember one of my brothers, he decided he didn't want to play baseball one spring. And my dad said, "Okay, well then you'll be coming home and I'll have jobs for you to do." He decided to play baseball.
Baseball's got to be more fun than whatever jobs Dad had in mind.
He wasn't about, because that was my brother that liked to push the envelope a little bit and challenge my dad. And so my dad said he wasn't going to be walking the streets. Now, we lived in a little town, even smaller than Ashland, much, much, much smaller than Ashland. But my dad said he wasn't going to be hanging out on the streets.
No, he's a good dad.
Yeah.
He needed to be productive, whatever he's doing.
Yeah, so my brother ended up playing baseball that summer because he didn't want to do what the jobs my dad, who knows what those jobs were.
They weren't going to be good.
No, I don't think so.
They were going to be jobs maybe that Dad had been putting off for a while.
I think so, probably so.
What other sports did you play?
I played field hockey, basketball, and softball.
Okay.
In high school. When I went to college, I played volleyball and basketball.
Okay. Oh, so you were a 2-sport player in college?
Yes.
Wow, that's a lot to juggle, especially back to back like that.
Well, yes, but back then, a long time ago, Paul, that's what you did. I mean, the seasons did overlap, but most of the time, the coach of one sport was the coach of the other sport, and that was the case I went to the University of Maine at Machias.
Where's Machias?
Way down east, next to the Canadian border. Like, we would go over to Campobello Island, Roosevelt's place, and
Oh, okay.
So,
Because is that in Canada? Or is
Yes.
that, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I went there as a kid.
yep, you had to cross
It's
over. Cross
gorgeous.
The border. Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I played 2 sports in college, but I would say that when one of us wasn't playing, somebody else was, so we would always go. You know, my mother and father never missed a game hardly at all, of as much
Really
as they
hard to
could.
do with 6 kids.
Yeah. They were, and obviously the boys' sports were much more popular, and you know, they were at night, and like when I was in high school, my games were in the afternoon, 3:30 in the afternoon. Well, my dad was working. My
Right.
mother didn't work while we were in school, and so they didn't. My mother would come occasionally, but you know, they went to all my brother's games because they
were
played at night.
right, and
So
that's
after
when
the workday.
when everybody could go.
Yeah, after the workday.
Has it changed much
Oh,
since
yes.
then?
Yes, now, much like it is here in Virginia, you know, like maybe the girls' game is at 7, but it's at the opposite school. So if like here in Virginia, or here, if the boys are playing Patrick Henry's playing Atlee, then at home, then the girls are playing Atlee at Atlee.
But
you know,
same
that
time.
type of thing, same time.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's the way it should be.
Yeah. Or now they do the 5:30, the 5 o'clock girls. I guess it's 5:30. 5:30 girls game, and then the guys game's 7:30.
Same
in high school.
same location, typically.
Yeah.
Yeah, my daughter played JV basketball. She's now doing track year round, but the girls would travel together, and so there'd be a JV game and then a varsity
Yes,
game.
yes.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the more typical way they do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
But for girls back when you were coming through school, they just schedule it whenever the other team could be,
Yeah.
wherever they needed to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you didn't have any fans to speak of.
Not like the boys did. No.
Yeah.
No.
Did that bum you out?
You know, at the time, I didn't know anything. I didn't know any different. But as I have grown, and you know, when I got the job at the college and all of that, I demanded the equality. But you know, I didn't know any different. My parents didn't know any different. You know, it's
Wasn't
not
a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not that they didn't care about my games, but my dad couldn't get off work.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a truck driver, so I mean, he was on the road. So
He was gone all week.
well, early on in my younger years, when I was growing up, and before I got first grade, second grade, I guess, when we moved to Maine. So I grew up when I was after I was born in Maine. Then my dad was from New Hampshire, and we moved back to Vermont.
Oh, wow.
And so I grew up there until first grade. After my first grade year, we moved back to Maine. And then my dad just had, he still was a truck driver, but he would go to work like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, and would be home by 5
Oh, wow.
the next day. So he hauled cement to, cement companies, where they would do bulk cement or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. You probably don't know the answer to this question, and I could probably Google it pretty easily. I had an uncle that lived in Vermont, in Brattleboro, if you know that.
I do.
Area. And
Actually.
I remember being up there when I was, I don't know, 5 or 6 years old, and I saw covered bridges for the first time. I'm like, these are beautiful bridges, but I don't know why they were covered. Is it to protect the rest of the bridge, or is it just an aesthetics thing? It was meant to be pretty.
You know, I should know that answer, Paul, but I do not. I think it was to protect the flooring, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'll look it up and I'll share it on maybe the next episode that I do.
Yeah. Man, I should know that.
No, you should. I'm not. I definitely wasn't trying to stump you. All right. So basketball was a common thing from when you were a little kid all the way through college, and then into your adult life, well into your adult life. Basketball's been part of who you are and what you've done for a really long time. What is it about the sport that you gravitated to it?
It was my favorite sport, even though, like I said, I played field hockey and I played softball. When I first moved down here, I got onto an adult softball team, and I really enjoyed that. But basketball is just something that I guess throughout my whole family, my uncles, whenever we got together, uncles, cousins, family, you know, we'd all talk basketball. It was always basketball, basketball. And so, I felt like I knew more about it. We would talk strategy, and I felt like there was more, like when we competed against each other, my family, my brothers and sisters and their friends, it was like that was a sport that we could compete against each other in a way.
Yeah.
Whereas baseball and softball and soccer, it just seemed like it was a little bit
It's
more
a lot
separated.
more. It's equipment intensive. It's people intensive. A lot of those other sports. So you can play. You can be entertained by playing 1-on-1, 3-on-3, 5-on-5. You can also be entertained by just shooting by yourself.
Yeah.
It's the only sport like that, and I also love. Besides the occasional referee's whistle, I also like the constant flow of the game.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's something to, like, every bit of your athletic skills, whether it's jumping, quickness, speed on a fast break, hand-eye coordination. It takes basically all of your athleticism to be really good at it. I think that's because it was my favorite sport to play growing up too.
Yeah, and I think when you're playing, like if I was playing against my brother, like I can make a basket, and he can make a basket against me. Whereas, like you don't need a whole lot of like strength or, you do have to have all of that stuff, but. Like I'm sure my brother could hit the baseball or softball farther than I can.
Right.
But basketball, you're shooting the basketball. It's the same. Even though you got some distance if you want. I thought there was a little more equity in basketball.
Yeah, I think to your strength point, you could have somebody who's very strong who can dominate inside, but you could have somebody who's a ton of finesse and they can flourish as a point guard or as a shooting guard or anybody that shoots from the outside. They don't have to have great strength.
Right.
And in fact, I would argue maybe that great strength hurts shooters.
Yeah, ball handling skills. I would go home during the summertime when I played at the collegiate level, go home during the summertime and play against my brother. I had to learn how to fake because, he was taller than I was. And so in order for me to get any shots inside, I'd have to learn how to fake. And so
You got really good at it, I imagine.
I don't know if I was good at it, but I at least could fake somebody if I had the ball underneath the basket.
What position did you play in college?
I actually played all of them because I went to a college that had a relatively neophyte team, and as a matter of fact, one of my teammates said when she grew up, now she was a senior in college, she said when she grew up she wanted to be just like me. But the team, my first game at the collegiate level, we lost to the University of Maine at Presque Isle, which was considered the PE school. We lost to them 98-18.
Oh my goodness.
And I had 16 of those points.
You were their only hope.
Yeah, so I brought the ball up the court, passed it, cut it back, shot it, drove, whatever. But my junior year, we won the state championship.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
we did improve.
Yeah.
So
By a lot.
a lot. And that back then, you played any level. There wasn't so much the D1, D2,
Right.
D3. So it was like because all women's sports were relatively young and new, and so you could compete against some of those schools. Not as well as 98-18 is quite a thrashing.
Yeah, that seems like that game shouldn't have been played maybe.
Yeah. Well.
Well, so playing all five positions, and obviously I grew up playing against boys and then young men, and I did not play in college, but when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, there seemed to be this, you're going to be the center, and maybe we'll let you play power forward, or in the number vernacular, 5 and then 4. And if you were a guard, you were a guard. You weren't going to play small forward. You maybe would drift into shooting guard from time to time, but you were limited to 1 or 2 positions. You were playing all 5, and you're a very humble person, but I'm guessing you played all 5 because that was the best thing for the team, and you were good at all 5 positions.
Well, probably so. My favorite, I probably would say that in college, after that first year or so, as we grew and developed, that I moved inside. So I was more of a forward. I was a pretty decent rebounder, could get the ball in the basket. But if we got pressed, then I helped bring the ball up the court.
Because you could dribble and pass.
I could, yeah.
I guess you should be a good passer playing any of the positions, but it's especially important for guards and
Yes.
small forwards.
Yeah, I preferred to play inside. I didn't want to handle the ball as much as what sometimes I had to, but preferred to play inside. 'Cause I got to score more.
I guess there's something to being closer to the basket.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but how tall were you in college?
5'8".
So pretty tall, I imagine, for back then.
Yeah, for a woman.
Yeah.
For a woman and the size of my school, pretty. Yeah.
Yeah.
I could compete.
Yeah, nice. What's your most memorable game from college, besides the 98-18 drubbing?
98-18. Well, probably my junior year when we won the state championship. It was double elimination back then, and so, or at least our state tournament was double elimination. And so we went through and we played our first round game, won. Second round game, won that one as well. And then the third round, we lost. We lost to Bowdoin. And that was like devastating. However, because it was double elimination, they had to beat us twice.
Yeah.
So, and then we beat them the next day. But that was like a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday deal.
So you played them 3 times.
We didn't play them.
Because they had another loss somewhere along
Right.
the way. I
Yes.
got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we beat them on Sunday.
I think I like the double elimination tournament better than what happens today.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I lament all the time. You know, our baseball and softball teams at Randolph Macon are so good and so successful. But when they do lose, you know, it's not one and done for them. They get to come back and redeem themselves.
Right.
And boy, there have been many basketball games where you just, well, even when we played for the national championship back in 2005, if we could have, my brother told me, he said, if you would have played that team 10 times, you would have beat them 9.
Yeah.
But that one day, you know, everything was going for them. They played very, very well. And we didn't do so good. And so we lost. We were out. Didn't win a national championship. But
I want to come back and talk about that season in particular. Basketball's a funny sport. You can not miss for 12 shots in a row and then turn around and you can't make 15. You can't hit 1 out of 15. It's a funny sport that way.
Yeah. So I've always lamented that basketball is a one and done thing once you get to the tournament. And because I do know that there are probably our men have won a national championship at Randolph Macon, but I think that even some of our conference tournament games could have been different as well.
And look, whether it's the fans or TV and the money associated with TV at the D1 level, I would think a double elimination tournament would play better. You'd have more games. I don't know why they wouldn't do that.
Yeah, and even a series. I mean, like in the pro sports, they, you know, best of 5,
Right.
or even best of 3 would be. But I guess time-wise and financial reasons and things like that, that's why they don't do that. But
I'm going to ask this question now, and I'm kind of jumping around here. Division III NCAA tournament for men and women, do they start with 32? I should know the answer to this, or do they start with 64?
now.
But at some point they were at 32.
Smaller, yes.
Okay.
Smaller.
But it's been 64 for a while.
Yeah, probably for the last 10 years. I lose track of time.
Yeah.
Probably definitely for the last 15 years.
Yeah. So to the double elimination point, I think if you're going to do that, and I do like the series idea, I have to wrap my head around that at the college level. But a double elimination tournament, I don't think you're inviting 64 teams. You're probably inviting a lower number, probably 32. And then you miss out on a 14 seed beating a 3 seed or a 12 beating a 5. You lose all of that if you go down to 32. So there's pros and cons to both approaches. But the series thing, I think you'd have to be even smaller.
Yeah, I think so too, because that's a lot of time and a lot of games. But yeah, I think so. But you know, it is. I mean, you've been involved in sports long enough to know that you see those teams, like even UVA a few years ago when they got beat by UMBC.
That's my alma mater.
It's shocking, devastating. And it's like, but it's like if they would have played UMBC 3 times, they would have beat them twice, and possibly 3.
You would think. You would think. Yeah, I actually met Ryan Odom not far from here, along the tracks at a Christmas party. Lovely guy, and I don't think he felt bad about beating UVA, but he wasn't like over the top. Like, yeah, we beat him. Like, he's basketball coaches in particular, because there's so many games, they have to be pretty steady when they win and when they lose. Yeah. All right. So you're a senior in college. What did you study? What was your major?
Business management with an
Okay.
emphasis on recreation.
Okay.
So when I got to the University of Maine at Machias, they had a 2-year program in recreation management. And then while I was there, I was one of 3 people that finished out 4 years. So there were 3 that received their business management degree with an emphasis on recreation.
And what were you going to do with that?
Was going to go, so basically everything that we studied in terms of business law, business organization, all of that, it was like, it was a bowling alley or a ski resort or, a pool or something like that. So I wanted to definitely go into some sporting area of some sort. And then, I kept looking, sent my resume out all across the nation.
You were willing to go anywhere?
Yeah. Just to see what was out there. I belonged to the National Parks and Recreation Association, and they had, a job search section in their magazine, and sent it out to lots of different places and got a lot of rejections for sure. And then Hanover County Parks and Recreation.
Of all places?
Yeah. Had a position open called, it was a CETA position, CETA.
Okay.
That stood for Comprehensive Employment Training Act.
Okay.
So it was a federal grant. And the position was for a draftsman trainee. And so Don C. called me and he said, we have this position open, and but the position is a draftsman trainee. And I said, I don't even know what that means.
I don't know what that means now.
And he said, well, we're interested. We're a relatively new part of the county, and we want to develop some parks and ball fields, and we want to kind of expand and grow. And I said, okay, so again, what does that mean? And he said, well, you'll be designing some parks and helping to establish some ball fields and things like that. And I said, okay, well, I'll try it. And he goes, I think you could try it. And I said, okay. So I moved down here. And one of the things that I also did, like if I knew you and you lived in Ashland, then I would definitely apply for areas in and around where I knew people, because I figured I could stay with you for a week or so until I found my own place if I did get a job.
Right.
So I had some friends that lived here. And so he gave me the job. And the Poor Farm Park,
Yeah.
I remember that was the first time I've ever seen the longest, thickest black snake in the whole widest world. I was out there cutting grass. This is before it was developed.
Right.
So there was just, some primitive trails through the woods that I know that they've developed into bike trails and cross country and all of that now. It's
a massive complex now.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It really is. And but I remember when the grass was as high as this table, and I'd have to go out there with that great big mower.
Do you hate snakes like I do?
Oh my gosh, I'm petrified of them.
I'm petrified of them too.
Petrified of them. Well, I saw that great big, thick, long black snake.
It's probably 6.5 feet long. Yeah.
It seemed as if it was, I don't know. But anyway, so that's basically what I did, just kind of piddled around. I actually had a draftsman trainee table where I would sit in there. I was on a stool that, you could ramp it up if I needed to get up. And I had a mechanical pencil.
Wow.
And these big sheets of paper, and I would draw things. And I'm not sure if anything ever came of it other than just getting my hours in, but
It sounds like you enjoyed it, though.
I did.
Yeah.
And then that position, the grant money ran out. And then I guess I had impressed Don C. enough so that he hired me. I became a program coordinator with Parks and Recreation.
And this is late 70s, early 80s?
This is 1977, 78.
Okay. Yeah, Don C. was in the Parks Department forever.
Yeah, he was the director of Parks and Recreation.
Yeah, for a long time. Other parks and places that you had a hand in designing?
The Poor Farm Park is probably the most, I think, that he felt justified in the position, is doing that. But, I rode around the county I still remember those days of riding around. People will say, "How do you know the county so well? You're not even from here." And I said, "Well, I used to ride around." I think he liked to get out and ride around, check things out.
Worst things to do.
Beaver Dam, Mount Montpelier, down at Pearson's Corner, and all of those places we would go. And then as we expanded, as Parks and Recreation expanded, and they didn't have their own facilities, they would have events at schools, and so programs and classes and different things like that. And so I'd have to go to those schools and get them going and all of that. So
The counties for Virginia County, Hanover County is very big.
it is really big, yeah.
I mean, if you want to drive from Beaver Dam to Old Church, it's going to take you
A long time, yep.
close to an hour, probably.
Yep.
Yeah. The parks today are in great shape.
I think they've done a really nice job, and I think the Parks and Recreation directors that followed Don C. have done an amazing job, because I think, first of all, they had more experience or were trained, and so.
A couple of months ago, I was driving near Liberty and Patrick Henry, and I said, I'm going to go for a walk in Poor Farm Park. And I took a road that it said was not a trail, but it clearly, you could drive a truck through it. And so I followed it, and I ended up, there was an amphitheater back there. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, no, I haven't been.
It looks like it was built probably in the 80s.
Okay.
And I'm like, I've lived here my entire life. Like almost every kid I grew up with went to Patrick Henry. How do I not know about this amphitheater that's there? It's slightly in disrepair. I don't think it's used maybe at all. But
yeah, I was going to say, I haven't heard of any events out there.
They haven't maintained it necessarily, but I imagine it was a pretty cool thing back in the day. All right, so you're here. You're doing the Parks and Rec thing. How long did that last?
I worked for Parks and Rec from 77 to 81. But meanwhile, actually, I applied for a job at the North Richmond Y. And I got that job down there. And I served as the program coordinator down there for a year or so. And that was a very stressful position.
Just a lot of things to schedule?
Yes, and it was elsewhere. It was really outside the building. So, like, we developed a soccer program down at Hanover Friends Church in Mechanicsville. We did some other classes elsewhere, but they were all self-sustaining programs. So, if the program couldn't self-sustain, then it fell by the wayside, and that was my responsibility. It was really much more and we had a summer program at St. Joseph's Villa, and so it was really stressful. And so I came back to Parks and Recreation, and while in 81, I went over to Randolph Macon and asked if they needed any help with their women's basketball program. That program was very new as well. It had started in 76, 77.
Oh, wow.
And so that was new. And the coach said, yeah, you can come and help us, but I don't have any money, so it's all volunteer. And I said, yeah, that's fine. But, and then, as luck would have it, I was just in the right place at the right time. And that's truly exactly what it was for me, being in the right place at the right time. The coach left in late July of 81.
Did she leave here?
She left to go to Cornell. She got a job at Cornell. And Rachel Anderson was the women's athletic director at the time, called them senior women's coordinator. I guess that's what her title was. They were desperate, I guess, late July. And so she asked me if I was interested, and I said, yes, absolutely.
And you were in your 20s at the time?
I was, yes, in my 20s, mid-20s. And then after I interviewed for the job and everything, she came back and said, well, you have to coach soccer and you have to coach lacrosse. And I said, well, I don't really know anything about those sports. And she goes, well, that's what the job is, so if you want it, that's what it is. And I go, I'll learn. And so I learned how to coach soccer.
Soccer and lacrosse are very similar.
Yeah, and lacrosse is a lot like baseball. A lot like basketball for me. And so lacrosse was much easier than soccer.
Yeah.
And so I had two male students that were my assistant coaches with the soccer. We were the first varsity team in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Randolph Macon was.
I was going to ask that because the basketball, men and women's, are really, really good. You've mentioned baseball and softball are really, really good. Football in recent years has become really, really good. What is it about Randolph-Macon and athletics and the fact that it was the first women's soccer program in the state of Virginia? I mean, there's clearly been an emphasis on athletics for a really long time. Does that emanate from somewhere, or is it just kind of happenstance? It ended up like that?
Well, I think there were some very good coaches at Randolph-Macon. And I think through the years the coaches have been allowed to, kind of create their own program. There's not a whole lot of, looking over your shoulder and saying you've got to do it this way, and this is how many hours you'll put in, and you can't do that, and you can do this, and blah, blah, blah.
So you had a blank canvas.
Yes, I had some really good bosses in terms of, just letting me do what I wanted to do, how I wanted to run my program. And I think that that's really what has happened at Randolph-Macon.
How awesome and lucky.
Really lucky, really lucky.
Wow. Yeah. All right, so go ahead.
You don't think of that while you're going through it, though.
You never do.
No,
you never do.
No, it's like, get off my back, or, why are you asking me that question? If it's like, well, why'd you play that zone? Or, if somebody questioned you with those types of questions, it's like, what? Leave me alone.
I don't have to answer to you.
Yeah, but then, after the fact, after I've been retired and think about different things, it's like, you know what? I really, really was fortunate to be able to just, it's your program, it's your canvas. You can throw all the paint on it you want. And
perspective is hard to come by when you're in the moment.
Yes.
When you're in the situation.
It is.
Yeah, you have to be a little removed from it to appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so was the program pretty good when you started as coach?
No. When they first started, Billy Wood was the coach, and he did a great job of trying to develop that program and get it off its feet. But like I had mentioned earlier, there were no divisions, so they played, UVA, William and Mary, like we did.
That's crazy to think about.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about. And, when I first got there, that's when the NCAA decided that they would, like a year or so after I got there, that's when the NCAA decided that they wanted to get involved in women's sports. And so we went.
They weren't prior to that?
No, we were associated with the Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women, AIAW.
Huh.
And, that just meant that you played any colleges that had women's programs. Didn't matter about divisions or anything like that.
Yeah.
Well, then when the NCAA took over in 1982, there were divisions, distinct divisions. And, without much thought, women had only been at Randolph-Macon since 1972. And so without much thought, and the program didn't have the financial resources and everything that the men's programs did, they said that the women could have 2 athletic scholarships. Now, this is 1982. And our men, being basketball and soccer, they had 4.5 scholarships. So the women had 2, so just half of that. So basically what it was for us when we went out to recruit was I could offer somebody a few $100. Well, they could say, I got a scholarship to go to Randolph-Macon. That was a big deal.
Right.
If you got $1,000. And so when I say 2 scholarships, that meant like if it cost $30,000 a year to go there, then I had $60,000 to work with. And, sometimes that went a long ways and other times not so great. But we also had to follow suit with our men's program, and our men were competing at Division II at that time.
Right.
Well, we had no business being in Division II because we were still very, very young. And so we had some serious and serious growing pains, and we didn't do so well. But, I will have to say that we competed, but, if you look at our one-loss record, it was like, oh, my gosh, So definite growing pains. And then in 1992-93, the college made the decision to go to Division III across the board. And that was a good decision.
Recently? Mm-hmm. Wow, okay.
Yeah. And we had to play out all of our scholarship players. And so even if we weren't giving any new scholarships in 93, I think it was like 95 maybe when all of our
sort of grandfathered through.
Current scholarship players had finished their eligibility, and so that's where we should have been. And then the college made the decision to give women's team, and it was really women's basketball, but there were other sports as well, but basketball was the emphasis. Once those resources came, our program began to take off. Got a full-time assistant coach, and we started traveling on a chartered bus, which, all the previous years we were traveling by van. And, I was the driver. And, you're thinking about driving when you're driving that
unless you want to get into an accident.
Valuable cargo in that van. You're thinking about driving. You're not thinking about what offense and defense you might have to play that night. And likewise after the game, there was no evaluation time for me because I had to drive, and it was at night.
Yeah.
All of our games were at 7, so coming home, it was like no evaluation time.
And some of your drives were pretty long.
Yeah.
So I have to remind myself, I'm a kid. I was born in the late '60s, and so I don't really remember this. But the history says that in Virginia, in particular, I think there were boys' schools or men's schools, and there were ladies' schools, and like UVA didn't allow women to come in because the sister school was Mary Washington. Women came in, I think, in '75. Sounds like Randolph Macon did something similar in '72. So you were there at the very beginning of this co-ed, co-rec sort of world, and it sounds like you had a ton of growing pains. But looking back at it, you probably had a blast doing it, or maybe not. I don't know.
No, I don't know about a blast, because growing pains, some are. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, there were some inequality issues and things like that. And sometimes I always had a quote on my door that said, a long-standing way of doing something doesn't make it right.
Right.
And, I think Randolph Macon was an all-men's school, and I think that they were very good at that and had developed a lot of men along the way. And here were these women. The facilities were not all that great. It was like, we'll take that room and we'll turn that into the women's locker room. But it really was not like a locker room. It was just an old classroom that they threw some lockers in, and things like that. But Randolph Macon has come a long way. I think that we came a long way sooner than some of the other conference schools that we played against. We were the first school to have a full-time assistant coach. We were the first school to travel by chartered bus for all of our trips. And, as a result of them Randolph Macon putting some money into the program and into the women's programs, I think we've developed. And that's why you had mentioned earlier about why are we so successful is, through the years, Randolph Macon has made that decision to emphasize a little bit more than maybe perhaps some other schools have.
Yeah, I guess the term blast depends on exactly what you're talking about. What was in my head was shared adversity with the players back then, and getting through that adversity together. That can be fun only when you're looking back at it, maybe not fun as you're going through it.
I agree with that. That's a great way to put it, because it is. I mean, there's tremendous memories, good and bad, that we all experienced. And I mentioned earlier, growing up, I didn't know any different.
Yeah.
And at the time, it still was sort of like that. In my first few years at Randolph Macon, it's like it's kind of supposed to be like this. But then, as Title IX and all of that became popular, it's like, yes, let's fight for it. Let's fight for it. And you had to fight. You had to fight, and you had to convince and make your cause known.
When did Title IX go into effect?
1972.
Oh, wow. It's been around that long.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow. But it wasn't being lived.
No.
In
It
most
still
places.
isn't. It still isn't in high schools.
Tell me more about that.
So I hear about these high schools. I have a former player that's a high school coach. My nieces and nephews are playing, and even my nephew gets to experience some things that my niece does not get to experience. For instance, videotaped games. The women's games aren't taped. Girls' game, I refer to girls and boys in high school and men and women in college.
Sure.
But, my niece's high school games are not taped.
Why aren't they taped? It's not hard to tape them.
Yeah.
It's not expensive. It's not expensive.
Especially nowadays. I think actually her high school does, but like when she goes on the road, perhaps another high school doesn't. And even when I was going recruiting, I would go to a girls' game at some high school, and there was no program, just a single sheet of paper with a roster.
Yeah.
But the guys were playing that night after the girls, and
it's all color and multi-pages.
And it's like, what? So, I think the Title IX is still there more so in high school, and I don't know about rec league, but I'm just guessing that little boys get more opportunities than little girls.
Yeah, that's probably right in most cases.
So.
Yeah. And as a dad of daughters, that doesn't make me feel good. If I was a dad of only boys, I don't know how much I would care, but as a dad of daughters, I certainly want equity there. And as a dad of only sons, if I had only sons, I should care about it either way.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what has happened. There are, lots of dads out there that are fighting for their daughters and other daughters as well, and I think that has made a big difference in lots of different areas.
Let's talk about the 05 season. Who was on that team?
Oh, wow. Well, the Megans.
Oh, you had two of them.
Yes, I had Megan Silva Schultz and Megan Sensky Capito. Those are their married names now. And then Michelle Orton. So those were the three seniors. Actually, they were juniors at the time, but they were the ones that were considered the best. But that 05 season, I had 3 point guards. So I say guards.
No, you didn't have point guards by then. Yeah.
I didn't need point guards then. But anyway, so Megan Silva was primarily the point guard, but when teams tried to shut her down, I had 2 other wing players that could handle the ball because that's the position they played in high school. But they were good shooters as well, and so we had 3 perimeter players that could bring the ball up the court easily against any type of press. And then
that's a luxury as a coach.
Oh, it's a luxury for sure. And then we had 3 players over 6'3".
What?
And so
at Randolph Macon?
Yeah, we had a fair amount of height inside, and great shooting touch, great rebounding, competitiveness.
You had 3 kids over 6'3". So I went to college 87 to 91 at University of Virginia, and I did a lot of pickup games with the men's team and the women's team. And the women, I don't think, had anybody over 6'3" back in 90, 91. And so fast forward 14 years later, Randolph Macon had 3?
Yep. Michelle Orton, she was every bit of 6'3". Emily Kreider, 6'2", 6'3". We always exaggerated a little bit.
Basketball, that happens, yeah.
And then we had this player, Janessa Maruzma, who was really a volleyball player and very much a, just new to basketball, but she was an athlete. She was rugged and just competitive. And she didn't have much of a touch around the basket, but her key was rebounding.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, when we played Trinity University out of Texas, that sent us into the Final Four. That was an overtime game, and the coach after the game said, where did you get I can't remember what her number was, 35 or something. He goes, we didn't scout her at all, but she had some key rebounds and a couple of baskets that were really beneficial to us.
So
but she really helped us.
Were all those games pretty tight through that tournament?
Yeah, they were. We played Trinity University. We played George Fox. We played they were from Oregon.
Okay, so you're playing across the country.
St. Benedict's out of Minnesota.
Were you traveling to some of these places?
No, we hosted them. We were ranked that year.
Oh wow!
And so we got to host
up until the Final Four.
Up until the Final Four, and then luckily, it's changed since then. But luckily, it's changed for the women, not so much the men, but the higher seeds got to host the games. And that particular year, Virginia Wesleyan was hosting the national tournament.
Oh,
and
wow.
You got to host 2 years in a row. And so they had hosted the year before in 2003, 2004, and some of our players wanted to go down and see what does it take to be a national, Final Four team. And we drove down there and watched the Final Four, and they realized that, hey, those women out there are just like us.
Yeah.
They're no different. The same size, same looks, everything. And then that following year, that's the luxury that a coach who has a good team has. I keep saying all I did was stand by the sidelines. They were on a mission.
Yeah.
That particular group of women were on a mission, and we got down there. Kind of lost my train of thought.
Well, for the Final Four, you had just beaten Trinity.
Oh,
and now you're in state.
Right, and all we have to do is travel 84 miles down the road to play in a national championship game in a Final Four.
It had all lined up.
Yes, and the place was packed with Randolph Macon people because the other schools that were there, University of Southern Maine, Scranton University, and then Millikan University out of Decatur, Illinois.
Yeah.
And so that was the Final Four. So all of those schools, they brought some people, but not like Randolph Macon, who was just 84 miles up the road.
Every alum that lived in the area, plus every student, faculty member, could have shown up.
Yeah. So everything worked out really well for that. And then that was the last year before our renovation of Crenshaw. So they were waiting because our season went until like mid-March. And it was supposed to be done the end of February. And we went till mid-March, and then they tore up the floor and put a new floor in and all of that.
And how disappointed was your team losing in the national championship game that year?
Whenever I see some of those players, they go, Coach, if there's one thing that I would love to have back, it was that game against Millikan.
Yeah.
And, I will lament about that as well. I'll talk about how we couldn't, as close as we were to the ocean that day, we couldn't throw that ball in that basket.
Yeah.
And somebody will kind of slap me upside the head and say, hey, that could have happened to you in your first round game.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And never would have made it there. But you made it to the championship game. But, Megan did something, broke her thumb the night before. And so, she couldn't handle the ball as well. Millikan played really well. They had a nice team of players, young players. And so they weren't going to be denied. And our players, we were down by 15 points at halftime and came back and made a game of it and then ended up losing by 20.
Wow. Yeah, that's wild.
It was really wild.
And that's probably the only game that had happened to y'all the entire season.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we only lost 2 games that season.
Yeah, wow.
One to Roanoke earlier in the season and then to Millikan.
That's nuts.
30-2.
What happened the next year? Because you had some juniors on that team.
Yes. So the next year, this is a great example of that was a big learning experience for me. So the next year, we were preseason ranked. We should have been preseason ranked number 1. We ended up being preseason ranked number 2 because the coaches that were on the Division III voting committee didn't know the difference between Randolph Macon Women's College and Randolph Macon. So Randolph Macon Women's College got 16 of our first place votes.
Then they shouldn't have had any of them.
They shouldn't have had. They shouldn't have even been considered. Period. So that was a big joke throughout the conference that they said, hey, thanks so much for the votes. We got 16 number 1 votes.
That's crazy.
So we were preseason ranked number 2, and we had another really good season. And at the end of the season, I served on the regional ranking committee, and always the western part of the United States, they have some good programs out there, but it's kind of like the teams are not, they end up with their record is not as good as what they are on the East Coast. And so it's kind of like, well, they don't really deserve to host. We can't put them out. We can't put a team that only has 4 losses out against a team that only has 7 losses, or, whatever the case may be. But anyway, it came up at the end of the season is, where are we putting the regional play? Well, Scranton they were right up there again, so they got to host. University of Southern Maine, they got to host. And somebody else got to host. Somebody up in, I don't know, Midwest. But anyway, it was the first time that anybody on the West Coast deserved to be considered to host one of the regional games. So they shipped us. We should have been the team hosting, because
you're preseason number 1,
yeah,
really.
And we finished number 2 in the season.
And you had an away game?
And we had an away game.
Out west.
Out west. We flew out to Seattle, and we played at Pacific Lutheran. And Hardin Simmons was there. Pacific Lutheran. And I forget the other team. But anyway, that first game is always tough. And so we watched Hardin Simmons play Pacific Lutheran. And it was awful. It was just like, oh my gosh. This game is, we've talked about this earlier.
Yeah.
That Hardin Simmons couldn't do anything, but they ended up winning. And so, of course, my players, we stay and watch that game. And so we're all fired up. So, oh, yeah, no sweat. We can beat these guys. And so we show up for the game the next day, and we're ready to play Hardin Simmons. But my players are cocky and, chit-chatting about things and, acting like it's no big deal. And that's the same thing that happened to us the previous year. Scranton was acting like that because they had beat us at some other tournament, mid-season, a couple years prior to that. And so they were just talking about, these are the same players that we beat 2 years ago. We beat them by 30 points or something. And that fired my players up. And so we beat Scranton to go to the national game. So this is the same thing that Randolph Macon was doing against Hardin Simmons. And they schooled us. And so that following year, Megan's senior year, we got beat by Hardin Simmons out in Tacoma, Washington.
Should have never happened.
Should never have happened. We should have, and that was the one year where the Final Four was going to be, or the next 2 years, because it was a 2-year commitment, as I mentioned, was in Salem, Massachusetts, at Salem State. And, of course, my family was all excited and all of that because we just knew. I mean, I basically had the same team that played for a national championship the year before. It was supposed to be in Salem, Massachusetts to play for another title. Nope, didn't make it.
It's not that easy.
No, it's not that easy. And, you get cocky and, you watch teams. And so from there off, when I talk about a learning experience, from there on out, I never let my players watch. Because it happened to us a couple other times earlier, but I didn't learn it. We watch videotape and you watch the game and you go, not very good at all.
Yeah.
Well, we got this, no sweat. And it doesn't work that way.
Basketball games are different every single time.
Yep.
Yeah. It's wild. All right, I do have to mention, since we're recording, 647 wins at Randolph Macon. That's quite a number. It's hard to fathom, especially considering how tough it was at the beginning of your coaching career at Randolph Macon. So you guys made massive improvements over the 38 seasons you coached. What's your proudest? What's the thing you're most proud of from your coaching career?
I think the most proud that I could be would be seeing a young woman come into the program, very, some of them a little more immature than others, and see them develop into not only a more competitive athlete and a better basketball player, but to see them develop and grow and mature as a young woman and know that basketball helped them in some way, their relationships with individuals, their teammates, some of the challenges that they were forced to meet on the court, even outside the court, just to see them develop as an individual. that means more to me than those wins and losses. And even as we've conversed here today, like I can't even remember some of the teams. Some things
It's a lot of teams you coached.
Some things that I can remember, and it just goes to show you that there are some things more important in life than basketball games.
We do have to remind ourselves that they are games.
So, but the relationships that I developed with each of those players, and now not every single player did I have a fabulous relationship with, some tighter than others. Their families, their parents, getting to know them, their siblings, things like that. That probably means more to me than the 647 wins. And only when somebody points it out, and sometimes I don't even remember when somebody asked me, and it's like, well, if he's going to ask me that today, I better make sure that so I had to go back and look myself, but
it's not like an even 600 or a 620.
Yeah, it's like 647. So why didn't I just coach another year so I could get
to a nice round number?
Yeah. So.
I have to ask this question because we had talked about recruiting a week or two ago. Recruiting your first 10 years versus recruiting your last 15 or 20 years had to be night and day difference because you had a reputation. The program had a reputation. You had a reputation as a coach. Was it easier to recruit in the second half versus, say, the first quarter of your time as a coach, or was it just different?
It was definitely different, and I think it was easier, because success breeds success. And sometimes it doesn't, because sometimes you're recruiting somebody and they self-evaluate and say, well, they're so good I can't play there, and I want to play. I want to be on the court. And so sometimes they took themselves out of the program or out of the opportunity. So sometimes it's good and bad, but in the early years, just it was basically we took anybody.
Yeah.
We were just trying to get bodies on the bench. And so it was hard because even though it wasn't as expensive as it is now, it was still expensive for a number of people. And I've always been amazed at the number of people that pay those dollars to go to Randolph Macon or to any private school for that matter. But, as the program did get successful, more players wanted to be associated with that.
Yeah.
So, I would say it got easier, but it also, there was a difficulty to it because of the cost of Randolph Macon.
Was there a turning point in the program at one point in the first 5, 10, 15 years?
Well, I think the turning point was when we went Division III, and the college put the money and the resources into the program, because that just made a big difference. It really did, because, and also I was able to give up coaching the other sports.
Yeah,
so
when did that happen?
Yeah, so in my first years at Randolph Macon, for the first 5 years, I coached lacrosse. And so I would finish basketball practice or a game even in the latter part of the season, finish a game, and then have lacrosse practice right afterwards because it was inside. And so we did a lot of conditioning and things like that. So, my day would start because I taught as well, and I liked the early morning classes, so I would have an 8 o'clock morning class, go through my whole day of working basketball practice or a game, home games, and then turn around, clear the gym, and work on conditioning with the lacrosse team.
Wow.
So that was for 5 years. As far as soccer goes, when I first started coaching soccer, that was only for 1 year.
I imagine, I've seen a lot of coaches from afar, not knowing them personally, who seem to struggle to walk away from the game. They just, you think they're gonna die one day and they're not a coach anymore, and that's the only reason they're not coaching anymore. You walked away, and you're still able to coach. You could coach today. You would have no problem coaching today. What caused you to walk away into a retirement?
Well, that's a great question because there were days when I said, do I want to do this anymore? I always said, when I didn't enjoy going to work or when I wasn't having fun anymore, because I always tried to get that across to my players, have fun, have fun. It's just a great sport. And when you're not having fun, how can you accomplish much? If it's just stressful, if it's just not fun, you don't even want to do it. So I always preach that to my players. So I said for myself, when it becomes that point. And right up until, that last year was 2020, my brother died in November of 2019. And that really took a toll on me because it was right during basketball season. And I think I went into a depression, and I think I took that out on my players. My anger, if we didn't do well, I didn't know. It was like, I don't know.
You weren't in a great headspace.
And I don't mean that as an excuse, but I know it wasn't fun for my players because it wasn't fun for me, but for some reason I couldn't snap out of it. I was angry because my brother passed away. But anyway, long story short is we won the conference championship despite me. So that's a great example of players make great coaches.
Yeah.
I had a wonderful team, beautiful people, wonderful team, and we won, and we went to Transylvania University. That's where we played our NCAA games and had a wonderful time there. We lost, shouldn't have lost, but we did. Was right there. We lost by 2 points and came back, and I thought, you know what? I didn't treat people very well this year, and is this the way I'm going to go out my career, not treating people, not valuing people? And so I just said, you know what, maybe I should just step away. The women deserve better than this. And so I made the decision. So when we got back from Transylvania, kids went to class Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday, the world shut down.
Yeah.
And so we were in COVID, and I was the PE director, so I was still working, and I had classes because I had to take over all the PE classes, but they were all virtual. And we didn't walk virtually, but
right.
It was kind of a contract thing. Like you just had to report in that you put 2 miles in today and you got credit for it,
right.
That type of thing. But I decided that the players deserve better than what I had given them this past year. And so I made the decision. And
any regret?
The only regrets that I would have to say is we had a great recruiting year that year. And this is the year that those players graduate. And so my regret when I go to see those players play is that I didn't have the chance to coach them.
Yeah.
And but as a coach, that would have happened anytime. If I would have stayed on and got a chance to coach them the first year, then there would be another class
right.
that I had to recruit. So.
Yeah.
So that's it.
All right, right on. Well, Carroll, thank you so much for doing this. We went at almost an hour and 13 minutes here.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, my.
Did time fly?
It did. It did. I know I kind of rambled sometimes.
You did not ramble at all, and I love your story. Thank you so much for sharing it with me, and I appreciate you doing this.
Well, I was delighted to be invited, so thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also really appreciate if you'd rate and review us. You can find us at scodupodcast.com.